Hello and welcome to another edition of Press Row here on Rivalry Family Media. I'm Todd Robbins. Happy to have you along with us and happy to be today joined by Telegram and Gazette reporter Tom Flanagan. Tom, great to have you here today talking about the state of athletics here in the state of Massachusetts. And as we were just saying before we came on, there are so many things to talk about. Obviously, the current pandemic situation aside, this school year, the 2019-2020 school year, and thus the 2019-2020 athletic year, has been, well, we'll use the word interesting to say the least. It has exposed a lot of the different problems, I would say, with the way athletics are framed and all the different things that athletics have to overcome in order to get to those competitions each and every week.
Yeah, Todd, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me first off. This is a great endeavor and great initiative here, and I wish you the best of luck. I think this is going to be really successful, and it's a great opportunity to hear some different voices from the sports world, and it's much appreciated, much needed in this time. Case for anybody, soccer, field hockey kids in the fall because of the dreaded mosquitoes, and that those mosquitoes now are going to be nothing if we ever get back to the reality. It's just a little bit of triple E, oh well. But yeah, certainly this has been a challenge, and you really do feel for the kids, the coaches, the parents too. That's something I didn't really think of at first, but starting to hear from some of these parents, they'll say, "Hey, what do you think? Are we going to play sports?" And you want to be hopeful, you want to keep that glimmer of hope and remain positive. But it's just, as we sit here in the middle of April, I just don't see how it can happen, and that really stinks.
No, without a doubt. You had brought it up in a tweet not long ago, and I've certainly mentioned it in a couple of our broadcasts. I feel for those seniors that perhaps as juniors walked off of the athletic fields a year ago in the spring, looking forward to, the opportunity to, well, there's always next year. And there was just that one more year in the sun. And as it turned out, there may not be that one more year in the sun, not just because they're not going to play at the next level, but because their career is just not going to continue.
Right. And then you're right. It's just not something you think about when you're a 16-year-old kid walking off the field or the court, the track for the last time. Is it in the back of your mind, maybe I tear an ACL and I can't play, but it's never a pandemic. I mean, that's the last thing that comes to mind. But you know what? You give these kids a lot of credit. They're very resilient. Some of the stuff that I see on Twitter, some of the things I hear from some of the kids I know who are still involved in sports, they understand it, and they understand that there's a huge, huge safety risk here, a life and death decision to be made, literally. And as heartbreaking as it is for them, I do applaud their maturity through all this. And it's got to be really, really tough. But the kids are handling it very, very well. And I know they're frustrated. I know they're sad, a mix of emotions. But I really credit all these kids and the parents too, and coaches, administrators for doing their best to keep the spirits up and finding other ways to engage. But there's no substitute for your senior season. It's a very, very terrible situation.
And no question about that. And I think it's something that, although it'll be an interesting memory to be able to relay to future generations, and maybe hopefully, I think what may come out of this certainly is the feeling of appreciation toward, I think, whether it's the appreciation towards school, which I think students sometimes take for granted, that place to go every single day, or if it's the appreciation for the opportunity to get to play athletics. As an educator, we're always repeating over and over and over again, athletics are a privilege, extracurriculars are a privilege. And sometimes I think when you say the same thing over and over again, they start to tune it out a little bit. One season kind of away from that, and maybe this will be the kind of the cautionary tale to remind everybody that, it really is, a real privilege to be able to compete in these kind of athletic endeavors.
Yeah, I think you're right, Todd. I think that's a great point. And if there is a silver lining here, that could be it. I do think most of these kids, and you cover athletics too, when it comes down to the last game or maybe it's a playoff game their senior year, they sort of know, wow, this really could be it. But the finality doesn't really set in, with something like this, and you sort of see your season go up in smoke, and you can't do anything about it. It wasn't because you lost the game. It wasn't, as I mentioned before, you broke your ankle. It's something completely out of your control. You've done everything right, and just to have it taken from you like that, I think it's a valuable lesson. Education too. These kids, they'll be happy to wake up at 6 and get on that bus. They're missing it. They're missing the routine. They're missing their friends. And fortunately, I think they have their social media and ways they can keep in touch. But it's not the same as that interaction. So I think you're right. I think these kids kids who are underclassmen now will constantly be reminding those younger than them, hey, don't take any of this for granted, not 1 second.
Because you never know ultimately whether this could be the last season to say the least. I think we should right up front here while we're at this end of the conversation and talking, of course, about athletics amid this pandemic. Have to mention the monumental redefinition, obviously, of the spring athletics season that has been undertaken by the MIAA, and I'm sure before this show is over, you and I will talk about a number of warts along the way and things that bother us. But at least for me, I've got to give them a tip of the cap to the effort they are making to keep the hope alive. And that was something that a number of the coaches that we've talked to on this broadcast have said, is that what they really appreciate is that it's the chance, the hope. We all recognize, as you said, that sitting here in April, it's awfully hard to believe that something is going to change so drastically to create the opportunity for a spring 2020 season. But nobody has killed that hope prematurely. They've left the door open for the possibility for it happening.
Yeah, the exact right thing to do. And I'm among the top critics there are. I rank myself really high in the MIAA critic power rankings. But you're right. And you know what, Todd? There's no other way to handle this. You can't just unilaterally say we're not going to play sports this year. You can't have that. You can't rip that away from a kid or a coach or parent. And they've done all the right things along the way. They're planning ahead, whether it's 2 weeks, 4 weeks, a couple months. They're making adjustments as they go. They're making some concessions. They're being honest. And I think it's one thing we always fault them for is the lack of transparency, which they're never transparent about anything, it seems. But with this, they've been right up front. We're not going to have state championships. We're not going to have sectional tournaments. It's going to be up to the leagues or the areas or whatever whatever that iteration might be. It's going to be up to you to find some way to crown a champion should you choose to do so. That was great. Another thing they don't love is turning over autonomy, and they seem to have done that and are willing to part ways with that control in order just to salvage something of the season. So yeah, as I said, nobody is more critical of the MIAA on most occasions, but on this one, they've got it right, and they are giving the kids and everybody associated with sports some glimmer of hope, and they're waiting till as long as they possibly can, and if they have to make that ultimate decision, they'll do it.
One of your colleagues at the Telegram and Gazette took a pretty good bashing on Twitter when he came out and said not going to happen, that being Carl Sutherland, who we know is a hard worker among the bunch as far as covering high school athletics. And it was some of the coaches and players that really jumped on him saying, all we want is hope. Killing that hope, that negativity is not what the world needs right now. And he certainly took a beating out on Twitter. Held his ground. He wasn't going to budge on that hot take. And what I was surprised is the longer the conversation went on and the more takes and voices that were heard, there were student athletes that did step up to defend his position and say, look, we all know, we can see what's coming. It's nice to hope, but maybe in reality, it's time to kind of let's talk about it honestly.
Yeah, you got to appreciate Carl's willingness to take some of the slings and arrows, because everybody's mad at a pandemic, and you can't disparage a pandemic or argue with it on Twitter, but you can argue with it, Carl. So, but you're right. He was a realist in that sense. I happen to feel the same way. I don't, you do want to salvage that glimmer of hope, and he did sort of, douse that, but he's right. At the end, and to your point, there were some student athletes who came and said, we need to face the reality that this just isn't going to happen. And, even if it does happen, it's just not the same. It's just, you're not going to have a full season. You're not going to have the opportunity to win the Central Mass Championship in advance. It's just going to be almost, if there is any, and believe me, I hope it does happen, but it will seem to me like sort of a exhibition or almost an AAU type of thing we've got going on here, not so much an organized high school structure from opening day until there's a champion crowned and everybody leaves the field. So yeah, he's right, and I do appreciate him standing his ground on Twitter, and that's what makes Twitter great. I mean, these kids had a common enemy, and they rallied against them, and it helped them get some frustrations out. But it was interesting to see some of those opinions.
It certainly was, and it was quite the conversation to say the least. But when you look at this modified spring season and what could be, and obviously they've considered a number of recipes, they've made a number of recommendations to the MIAA board of directors, that being the Tournament Management Committee. Of course, on social media we're seeing it as the TMC, but it's Tournament Management Committee. They recommended, as you mentioned moments ago, obviously sacking the idea of any state level playoffs and really just having sectional playoffs playoffs, something that we'll probably discuss in great detail when we get to our discussions of the future of statewide tournaments coming down the road. But the traditional sectional tournaments is as far as they will have time to go. And people have even suggested, one Colin Davis, lacrosse coach at Leominster High, even suggested he'd be willing to work outside the normal school year. He wants the opportunity to coach his student athletes, whether it's in June, July, August. He doesn't care. Of course, there's a number of legal ramifications and fiscal crisis pieces that, folks certainly recognize beyond obviously the health concerns as to whether you could actually run a season beyond the actual calendar as far as the school year goes. But certainly creative ideas are open. What would you like to see? What do you think is the best possible outcome given obviously the circumstances we're in?
Yeah, I think what I'd like to see is, to Coach Davis's point, and it's a good one. I understand completely his passion and wanting to coach those kids one last time. You've been with these kids. In some cases, these coaches have been together with these kids since they were in seventh grade, and you want to see that through. I'd love to see some buy-in, whether it's sport by sport or across the board. A collection of coaches, maybe led by someone who's of the same mind as Coach Davis. Let's just get this done. Maybe we do it in July and we squeeze a 2-week season in, who's not. You know what? I bet you'd have good legal ramifications aside and liability and all that stuff understood, locations and other things. But if you could do it, I think you get a really good number of kids who would sacrifice anything else for those 2 or 3 weeks in the summer, whether it's vacation or a part-time job, they'd give it up in a heartbeat just to do this. And I think if we could see that, whether there's some restrictions as to who can attend, as long as these kids get to just to have that one more opportunity, I think that would be just a great idea and definitely worth exploring. You owe it to the kids to explore it. Take it all the way to a no. Find every single reason why you cannot do this, and if it comes down to legality or availability, whatever it might be, but take it to an affirmative 100% no chance we cannot do this. Don't leave anything out there. Don't leave any possibility that could have happened. You regret that for a long time.
Without question. And it certainly seems like with the direction that state officials have been moving, they will do everything, continue to redefine, obviously, what the season can possibly look like along the way. And your point is well taken, whether it's a 2-week season or a 2-week tournament or some kind of a round robin scenario just within your league, something for the student athlete to be able to wear that uniform just one more time, I think would make all the difference in the world. And you pointed it out in a social media post on Twitter, and that is, as far as a PR move goes, with all of the efforts, the MIA may be 1-78, but this is the one win you want to have as far as PR moves go.
Right, absolutely, and you would have to have and I don't know whether the MIAA could or would endorse that, but even if they don't, so be it. It's a tournament, and you call it the North County tournament, and you get your Leominster, Fitchburg, Oakmont, Wachusett, get them all in there, and you have some T-shirts or some trophies at the end for the kids, and do it without their blessing. I think if it would be out of the school year, I don't even know, what the ramifications would be or what sort of involvement the MIA. So it would not be MIAA sanctioned. Oh well, the kids know who they are. The kids know who's on the team. They know the coaches. They know their rivals, their opponents. It won't matter at that point. Given there's no state champion anyway, why not? As I said, the thing I would most like to see is for every coach, every sport, to have a leader or a group of leaders from the coaching ranks, and maybe some administrators as well, who do everything in their power to take every single suggestion.
Without question, that taking it to the limit will of course be the key to the next realm of what happens, obviously, in a spring 2020 season, modified or otherwise. All right, Tom, time for us to dig into the kind of state of Massachusetts athletics. Of course, this is kind of the third phase, if you will, of what has gone on in this 2019-2020 school year, 2019-2020 athletic year, as to the things that we have seen. And we have to kind of dig all the way back to that Triple E epidemic that began obviously the fall season. And maybe at some points we even stretch it back into the summer because, of course, you had these really hot days during the traditional double sessions, preseason training that affected how things got started. And I feel like we were off to a bumpy start in the athletic year all the way back in August 2019. And I don't know that the bumps have stopped. I think they've just become more dangerous.
Yeah, I would agree. And with each of those situations that you mentioned, it was health, right? Health and the safety and health of the players, the athletes, first and foremost, but everybody else involved too. And you cannot, as we're seeing now throughout this pandemic, you cannot put a price on that. You cannot be too careful when that happens. But yeah, it's just been a tumultuous year for everybody. And as we said from the beginning, it really, particularly those seniors, to not have that opportunity, but to not know. Again, the unknown. Yeah, so my junior year, the beginning of my senior year, I missed a couple Friday nights under the lights. Okay, well, I still got my spring sport, and to have this one last go around with my buddies, but now that's not going to happen. I can't remember a more challenging season or academic year for student athletes in my 15 or 18 or 45 years covering sports. It really just sort of it almost defies believability that all these obstacles have been thrown in the way. And in the end, that the ones who suffer are the kids. And again, none of these are their fault. None of them. It's all, there's nothing they could do about it. There's no level of preparation. There's no extra work they could have put in. It wasn't, they missed a detail. Nothing they could do about it. Just a terrible turn of events.
And I think the way some of those turn of events have been managed, obviously taking the current pandemic, and we'll put it aside for the moment, I think some of the things we saw, particularly during the fall season, with a combination of course, what was going on with Triple E and how games had to be rescheduled, and it being left to each individual home team to obviously make some kind of decision. And then obviously you kind of kick in some of the rules issues that were being considered as well. You end up with games that were getting forced in on Friday nights, but they weren't really being played on Friday nights. They were being played at 2 and 3 in the afternoon. And at some schools, I know, one, Assabet Valley Tech, in Marlboro, they gave their athletes the option of either playing Friday afternoons right after school or rescheduling their games to Saturday. And the athletes said, you know what, it fits better into our lives to play on Friday right after school. So they got to make the choice, have some input in that process. Whereas in other cases, schools picked up, moved games to Saturday, and Saturday seemed like the logical place. The crowds were good. The weather was nice this past fall. It really seemed to play into that. And then I look at games like the Leominster Shepherd Hill game that got forced into being played on a Friday night, got moved that like within a 24-hour window of when the game was supposed to be played, and then went out. And if you just go back and you look at that game, ignore the broadcast piece of it, just watch with your eyes for a moment. Of course, ignoring the broadcast because, of course, I was apoplectic through most of the broadcast. You had a third quarter of that game that, clearly Leominster appears to score before the end of the third quarter. The game officials blow the play dead short of the goal line so that it maintained a 30-point margin. You now go to the other end of the field. The clock starts because, of course, this new federation mercy rule gets put into effect. And the mercy rule allows the clock to continue to run endlessly without any form of stoppage. And now all of a sudden, a game that was moved for health issues is now being played under, Triple E modified, timing, then is being played under a modified mercy rule because of the score of the football game, is seemingly being played under these rules where the game is being played at half speed, and to me is more dangerous than if you just played the sport straight out.
Yeah, I think from the beginning of the summer, when we really started to hear about these rules and what they were and what they were meant to do, my question had always been, well, why? Well, that's what the federation does. Well, again, why? Why does it matter? So, and the drumbeat we kept hearing is so that Massachusetts can have a, quote, seat at the table at the federation level. Why? What does that do for you? Who cares? It just doesn't make sense to me. You have officials who just said, I'm not doing this. I've been doing this too long. I'm too old to learn this. No, thank you. I'm not learning a new set of rules. You had other officials who took on the added responsibility of sort of being coaches and mentors to their peers, and you knew that there was going to be some trip ups, and there were. It just didn't seem to have there was no logical reason to do this. And you're right. Some of those rules they did bear themselves out as what everybody thought they would be, just counterproductive, and it's sort of making the product look much different than it needed to be. And it's classic overthink. Didn't, I still don't know why it happened. I don't understand it. Many folks I've talked to, coaches, officials, players, parents, they don't get it. They don't understand why it had to be done, but it was done. And, it really just comes down to, and we get into this bias, I'm sure this will come up again, but it's to cater to Eastern Mass. It's something they wanted to do, and they're the big dog, and we're just sort of the tag-alongs and the little brother, and we do what they say. And again, so it happened. It wasn't perfect. Everybody expected it to be some blips, some major blips. That Leominster game is a prime example of this thing just going totally awry when it did not have to, and it happened, and everybody knew it. So normally in these cases, you think these things through, and you're surprised by a negative outcome. Nobody was surprised. Nobody. This was just something that did not have to happen. I guess I just don't see the benefit. And throughout the year, as I talk to coaches and players, whether it's prior to a game, after a game, doing a weekly column, do you understand this? Off the record, of course. And what does this mean? They all, to a man, almost, I don't know. What do we get from it? I have no idea. Just more work and more things we have to learn, and more rules that don't make any sense.
And I think that piece that you mentioned, that seat at the table, so to speak, with the federation rules, obviously, it's been phased in over a long period of time. I mean, I can speak to the sport of softball because it's a sport that I officiate in, and softball went through this in a conversion from ASA, and it was early 2000s, 2001, 2002, roughly speaking, when the sport of softball went through its transfer. Football, ice hockey, volleyball, they were the last kind of three sports that hadn't gone through the transition, so to speak. But I guess the question becomes, as you pointed out, why now? What suddenly changed to be the impetus for the need for it to happen? One of the other arguments that was made beyond, obviously, the seat at the federation table was this conversation about some form of insurance rider. Whether, if you were to try to, end up in a scenario where, of course, in a litigious society, if somebody was to sue in the case of high school football, how do you litigate a scenario where you all of a sudden have this, game going on? It's a high school game, but it's being contested under college rules. Would that stand up in some form of litigation? And things kind of devolve from there. But I guess at the end of the day, I'm just not sure what changed so dramatically. I present a visual point that I think makes all the point in the world. This is what a college rule book looks like. It's thick, it's detailed, it says everything that it needs to say about the sport. I've always joked that the Federation rulebook looks a bit like a pamphlet, something that you'd pick up, maybe at a rest stop somewhere. This is now what's governing the game that you love. It's a very difficult transition when you look at those two things happen.
Yeah, and you're right. So we talked earlier about, we were commending the MIAA for being transparent as it relates to spring sports and what will happen. There was, in my opinion, there was not much transparency there, because when you ask a coach from a town within our coverage area or a school district within our coverage area, what do you know about this? Why is it happening? You've got a lot of, I don't know. Well, do your school administrators know? Do your athletic directors or principals know? Well, not really. They sort of say it was, and to your point, insurance, that was brought up a couple of times, but really it just kept coming down to this seat at this table, the Last Supper of football, if you will. Who cares? Who cares what somebody in Texas or Oklahoma thinks about the way our high school football is played? What does it matter? They have no bearing on the outcome of the games, the experience for the kids, or in some cases, whether or not a kid is the Michigan coaching staff going to say no to the next 340-pound Shepherd Hill lineman because he's playing under Massachusetts high school football rules? No, he's not. It just doesn't make any sense at all. And it wasn't a money thing either, which is a little bit weird. You couldn't really follow the dollars like you can in some cases. It just didn't make sense, and you wonder, what did we miss? What conversation was Central Mass frozen out of, or at least most of our representatives, or what did they not understand? Maybe they didn't understand it. It could be that too. But as I said, talking to these coaches in the fall, none of them really knew. And many of them, by week 3 or 4, no longer cared. It is what it is. These are the rules. We have to play by them. There's going to be these hiccups. There's going to be things we can't stand or can't figure out. We just have to play.
I think the point you had made earlier, which really stands out to me, is that, in the case of obviously how things have been managed in this pandemic, there's been not a point missed, right? That there hasn't been one detail missed, that they're really taking the time to make sure that they hit all of those points from an administrative standpoint. And I feel like, again, going back to that mercy rule, now Massachusetts had a mercy rule underneath the modified college rules that they were playing with. And if I'm not mistaken, if you called the timeout and you were the team that was ahead, the clock stopped to allow then the federation rules to come in, and then to miss the point that, oh, wait a minute, we need to have some modifying, adjustments to the rules, which we have later found that Alabama, New Hampshire, and other states have done, where they've added on these kind of requirements that if a team is ahead and they call a timeout, no, the clock's not going to run. I mean, that's only logical. It's only logical that the team that's ahead, if they're going to take a timeout, you're not going to continue to run a clock like that. And so it led to this perception, going back to this Leominster-Shepherd Hill game. If you watch the game broadcast off, it looks like the whole thing's in the bag. It looks like the team that is ahead has made a deal with the officials. Everybody knew at halftime Leominster wasn't going to be able to close the gap. And so now we're just going through the motions of a football game to chalk one up. And it's like, that is the complete wrong reason to contest a high school athletic game or any other athletic activity from professional all the way down.
Right. And if you want to talk about liabilities and being prone to being injured, and you've seen it time and time again and know this, that if you're starting to do that kind of stuff, where you're, as you're saying, where there's this, presumably the game is over as far as one team being able to catch the other one. Now you're messing with the rules, you're messing with the intensity level of the game. That's how you're going to get a kid hurt. You put a ninth grader in there who's never played, and there's kids, some kids are going 100%, some kids are taking cues from the officials, and maybe by association, their coaches, that, well, this game's over, the clock's running, I'm just going to kind of jog my way through the field. That's when you're going to get hurt. And I just, these situations, again, it just didn't make any sense, and it never did. And I think we're stuck with it at this point, but it really didn't do anything to enhance the product. If anything, it made it a little bit worse because there was a lot of confusion at times over calls and clock and what's going on with the clock and field position and penalties. There was a lot of confusion. I heard it, in the stands at many games with parents trying to figure out, either loudly or talking among themselves, loudly at the officials or quietly amongst themselves, what's going on here. And there's no experts. In the old rules, there's always those people who understand everything that's happening in the game. There's not many of those folks anymore. Whether it's at me as a media member, there was things I'd see every week, and I'd say, oh yeah, that must be one of these new rules that I'm just not familiar with, and nobody really told us.
No, and there were certain sports that when you go out and cover. When you go to a field hockey game, the crowd is awfully quiet because there are very few people in that crowd that truly understand when the whistle goes off. They know it goes off a lot, but there are very few people that truly understand whether that was good, bad, or indifferent call. In the conversation at a field hockey game, I would say a men's or women's lacrosse game as well. I mean, there are very few parents in this area that really have a good grasp of those sports, so they just spend their time being supportive. When you go to a football game, it really doesn't matter whether you're casually paying attention to it or whether you're a media member, like you said, who's covering the play moment to moment to moment. There are things you just knew about the sport of football that you no longer know. Somehow I became dumber in a game that I've been covering for 2 decades.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's it. That's a big thing. And oftentimes, being up in the press box, you'll have a game official, the clock guy usually, who's been a referee for 3 decades, and ask a question to that guy, and he goes, I don't know. He's getting signal from the ref on the field to stop the clock, wind the clock, and he's saying, this is not what's supposed to happen. And yeah, it seemed rushed too. Among all the other issues, it seemed really rushed and forced upon. We're going to figure this out in 2 weeks in the summer, and all you referees and officials are going to have to know what's going on here. And as I mentioned earlier, there are referees who just said, no, thank you, I'm not doing it. I can't. I'm not going to relearn this. I'll do some Pop Warner games locally or some AFL games or whatever it is. I'm not going to do this anymore. And I think that's tough too, because now you've got some inexperienced officials, and maybe that's what we saw in some of these instances where things didn't go right and the clock seemed to be off. Maybe there's some inexperience, but mostly it's just a lack of understanding of the rules. And I'm not sure that those officials were put in a very, very bad spot, and I don't feel like they were supported enough to be ready to hit the ground running. And that was evident in probably on a week-to-week basis.
You mentioned rushing, and of course, we're talking about officiating, and this is one of those pet peeves of mine. And again, it somewhat stems from my experience in the sport of softball, but it has now become a plague that we're seeing across a lot of sports, is this hurry seeming to get the game started and get the game over with. And that to me is just when the game is posted for a 7 o'clock start and people are going to show up on a Friday night for a 7 o'clock start. That's what time the game starts. You can start your meeting and your coin toss and your national anthem a little bit before that. That's what they would do. I mean, you've covered the college level. There's a timing sheet. The timing sheet takes you right to whatever the agreed upon kickoff, tip off, or otherwise is. And at the same point, I feel like in high school, they don't do that. They don't get down to that level of administrative detail. And so what ends up happening is an official walks on the field 15, 20 minutes early, and all of a sudden, whistle blows, all right, let's play. And off we go. And it's like, that's not how this works. You told people there was a time. That's the time the game is supposed to start. And what's your hurry? Where are you in a rush to go? The game you're doing today, that's the best game of the day.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's a pet peeve of mine. There's a basketball program that's notorious for this. A great program run by great people. You don't think name names, but there'll be a 7 o'clock start, and there's been times I'm rushing from one place to another. I get there at say 6:48. I'm in the door, and you hear the whistle, and you walk in. What? They've been playing for 90 seconds already? What's going on here? Is my phone broken? Or yeah, but and the same thing happens with football. It was especially evident to me on some of the Saturday games when you sort of have all day, it seems, to get ready for these things, whether it's a 1 o'clock start, 3 o'clock start. You show up to the field 30 minutes early, and 10 minutes after that, they're ready to go here. And you know, the officials, well, we got 11 guys here, 11 guys here, and we're here, so let's play. And yeah, you're right. That's a huge pet peeve. And you know, it's again unfair to some of the fans who are coming in here and paying money to see. You know, it's not, you're not going to see the Red Sox, but it's still it's money. There's a cost to it, and you come in and you miss the first quarter, you miss your son's big gain or your daughter's goal in field hockey because everybody, the administrators and the officials, just decide, well, we'll start now. Yeah, it's just you're right. Where are you going? What's the hurry? And just start it on time. Doesn't seem to be like too big of a deal, but yeah, it is.
And it's one of those things that seemingly is becoming more and more and more pervasive. And I think that's the thing that's bothering me so much about kind of, if I'm going to position the state of athletics right now, is that I feel like we're on the verge. Again, it bears repeating because obviously we're in the middle of this pandemic and people are doing everything they can for athletics. So we have to set that aside and go back and look from the 30,000-foot view on how the rest of the year has gone if we're going to kind of after action report how this year has gone. And I feel like we are dangerously tiptoeing with some of the things we're pointing to and some that we'll continue to talk about on this broadcast, that we're having athletics just for the sake of saying that we offer them. We're not making sure that the experience from top to bottom for the student athlete, for the fan, for the people that are participating in the game and who are supporting the game, the alum that comes to the game, the music people who come to the game, whether it's the band or some other form of performer that comes, there's no effort being made, it feels like, from an outside world view, to make it the best possible experience it can be. It's all right, let's go. We got to do this. We got a game to run today. Let's get that done. Okay, we got to get the field clear. We got another one coming on. How quickly we can get that one done? Okay, yep, great. Got to get to my weekend. See you later. Bye.
Yeah, I'm going to do my my Stephen A. Smith big pause here because I've got I can unload on this subject for it could be its own program, but to me, huge pet peeve. I do not get it. I think whether it's, we'll take football for example, because that's the one that most people know, and I think there's very few schools in Central Mass that I have not visited yet for a football game at this point, but what a difference from place to place. And that is a direct reflection on leadership in the school. I don't want to say it's the coaches because they have to coach, but Leominster is the gold standard to me. Shepherd Hill's up there too with the game experience, the experience for fans. It's a big deal. It is a big deal for these kids, and it bothers me to no end when administrators are dismissive of it, saying, well, it's just sports, we're here to learn. No, there are many kids. I was one of those kids who, if it was not for sports, I would have probably failed many of my classes. I was really just trying to do my best to stay eligible. And there are many kids who wake up in the morning and it's a Tuesday morning, they don't want to go to school, but I have a basketball game tonight, or I have practice today and I can't miss it. it's a big deal. Paul Constantino, who you know well, always he's fond of saying that athletics is an extension of the academic experience, because you're out there, you're learning much more than just a subject in school. You're learning much more than mathematical formulas or literature. You're learning, these are really life skills, and that's not to be understated. To me, when you're being dismissive of sports or being dismissive of a big part, I think there are about 50% at least of kids in Massachusetts high schools who participate in some MIAA sport. And so you're basically shortchanging 50% of your kids. But getting back to what I said, you go to Leominster or Shepherd Hill, it's an experience. The community's involved, the school's involved. You've got the band. It's not just the 40 or 60 kids who are on the football team. It's everybody. It's an event. And you go to some of these schools, and did they not even tell the community that they have a football team? And I understand not everybody's going to go to a game, but there's just nothing. There's just this atmosphere of blah. Like you said, okay, we did it. Check that box. Yes, we had a football game. Oh, I have to call the score into the telegram. Okay, I guess. Well, do something. Put some effort forth, or don't be that administrator. Don't do it. If you're not passionate about it and you don't want to give those kids the best experience possible, it doesn't have to be. It's not necessarily just the winning programs either. You know that. You go to some of these schools and the teams aren't very good, but I'll tell you what, their peers are there, the students are there, the families from town are there. It's a great experience, and that is a reflection to me of leadership within the school and making that effort to make sure that athletics is a part of that academic experience for everybody, not just the student athletes. And it just does not exist in some places, and that's getting worse and worse by the year. It is. There was a time 10 years ago where even the most, I would say the most modest gatherings for these games would at least have some energy to them. You go to some of these gyms, whether it's basketball or even some hockey games, and you're just, what is going on here? You can hear a pin drop, and it's just not what it used to be. And now being an old man telling you to get off my lawn, but it just isn't the same. And that comes down to administration. Like I said, the coaches have to coach, and they have a lot to deal with. Each kid's different. Some of these coaches are mother figures, father figures to these athletes. They have a lot more to deal with than just making sure they play music when a kid's walking up the bat. But there are things that you can do to make this experience great, and some are very good at it and take it seriously, and others, it's embarrassing.
Without question on that point. I thought where you were going to go with that was going to be about the existence of a press box, which at some places it's turned into a Cadillac to have a press box, and let alone whether they maybe refurbish a facility and don't put the press box in. It's becoming a thing that goes the way of the dodo in some ways. Whether you're a member of the media who's coming in as a member of the print press, or if you're coming in as a member of the broadcast press, you have to construct your press box or travel with tables and chairs in order to build it when you arrive.
You've got to be a MacGyver of sorts, I guess. But yeah, and related, it's promoting too. I do we all do at the Telegram. We do columns for each sport every season, and you put out the feeler out there every single week. I ask every single coach, tell me your best story. Tell me about your kid who has the best GPA. Tell me about the kid who's an Eagle Scout. Tell me. And some are great, others are not. And to me, why are you doing this? If you're not in the business of promoting your kids, giving your kids that opportunity to shine, your program, your school, do it. Let's face it, these are puff pieces. I'm not going to write about a kid who got in trouble at a party, or a kid who failed off the team, or who had a disagreement with a coach. No, these are good stories. Shine a light on the good of your student athletes, your community, your school. And some just don't do it. So then what's in it for you? Is it just the extra little bit of money you get at the end of the year? If you've lost the passion, you're shortchanging your kids, and the kids know. And a lot of these, we talk about all the time. Well, you look at the new school year. Wait a minute, didn't that kid play for this school last year? What happened here? What is she doing at this school? Well, part of it's that. Of course, you get the parents who say, Jennifer should be the starting point guard because she's going to UConn next year. No, she's not. But a lot of it is the experience that these kids just aren't feeling like it's just not an experience. And there's plenty of opportunity, believe me. And too, you're never going to turn down a great story or the opportunity to tell a really good story about a kid. And I don't care if the kid has played 1 minute a game or no minutes. If that's the best story and that's the best representation of your school, you should be proud of that. You should promote it. And the fact that some of these Some of these schools don't. Again, it's just very frustrating. And me now as a parent with my kids, not quite in high school, but getting there, to me, that's a golden opportunity, and that's a part of your job as a coach or administrator is to do that.
And that's the beneficial difference that you point out, by the way, to covering interscholastic athletics versus covering collegiate or professional athletics. At collegiate or professional athletics, you have those questions, you have those stories you have to cover, you have to follow. The question you hear oft said in the media, regardless of whether you're broadcast or print, which is the question that has to be asked, the story that has to be told. The great part about covering interscholastic athletics is you don't have to. There are stories you can completely ignore the existence of, the party, and the things that we all know that maybe are a bit of a pockmark in certain programs. We are allowed to completely ignore that.
Right.
Our job is to really highlight the positive things that are going on in athletics. Those are the stories you want to tell. You don't want to be covering the pockmark stories. You want to tell the story of the kid who persevered, who sat on the bench, got in the one game of his career, and got the ball at the key moment and scored. That's the story, boy, girl, or otherwise, we want to be telling in interscholastic athletic media. And I think a lot of us work very, very hard in order to get that point across. And you're right, it's very difficult when you don't get the support for it.
Yeah, and it's tough because the other side of that is you'll get some of the parents who will then call your boss and say, "Why isn't anybody writing about so and so or this team or that team?" And I would never throw a coach under the bus and say, "Well, you know what? Here's my email records from the last 8 weeks where every Monday morning at 9 a.m. I said, 'Hey, what do you got?' And my response is zero." But you're right. That's what it is for most of these kids. This is it. This is That's the question to ask a coach when we do the football previews and stuff. Everybody knows about the seniors coming back, and he's 220 pounds, and he's fast, and he ran for 1,200 yards. Everybody knows that. Ask them about, say, what is your best story? And inevitably, they will tell you, "Oh, yeah, to your point, this kid came back from a broken ankle, and he missed 2 seasons, and he said, I wasn't even going to play football, but his buddies convinced him to play, and here he is. He's having the time of his life." That's what it's all about. These kids are not, this is not Max Preps we're writing for here, or one of these showcase websites for elite AAU players. This is Central Mass, public school, mostly public-private school, high school sports, and we just want the best stories, and that's what readers want too. I mean, very very few readers really care about the kid's stats. Well, 26 points a game, okay, that's good as part of a story, but that's not the big story. That's not what people are going to click on. They want to see those great stories, and believe me, I've been very fortunate, and there's some stories that I'll never forget, and I'm so thankful to have the opportunity to write them. So I don't mean to cast aspersions on the entire system of doing this here, but you're right. They're hard to extract sometimes. But to me, it's if you're an administrator or even a coach in this sense, do something to promote your student athletes and your school, and that's going to look good for everybody, your community, your school, the teachers. Everybody wants to see that. So just take advantage of the opportunity you have before you. That's all.
You want it to be the best you possibly can be. And of course, the benefit of working in sports is that we do get to maybe be the glimmer of positivity in the world. All you need to do is look around in the middle of this pandemic and realize that there are no real sports to cover other than Tom Brady left and any of the other negative things that you could possibly come up with about the fact there are no sports going on. That's all there is for sports to cover at this moment. When sports are really involved and entrenched and people are engaged in them, it is a bit of escapism. It's a way to avoid thinking about all of the negative things you do interact with. I mean, obviously, we've seen this in local news over the years where, the local sportscast went from maybe being 2, 3, 4 minutes long. It's down to about 90 seconds a newscast at best. And guess what? The rest of that 27 to 28 minutes was nothing but negativity. But sports gets to be that one bit of positive. So like you said, in a lot of cases, the reader wants the positive story. They want to hear the good things that are going on, the positive things that are happening. If they want to hear the negativity, all they're going to do is read the front third of the paper. They'll find all the negativity they need.
Yeah, it's a cruel world out there, as they say. But you know what? It's a break from reality, and I think we'll see that a deeper appreciation for sports of all kinds once this pandemic kind of goes away and everybody can move about safely and in a healthy way. I think we'll see sports will take even more of a level of importance just for that escapism, just for about all the negativity, about everything that sucks, right? In sports, you can kind of find those good stories.
And there are lots of them out there in order to highlight. I want to turn back to something you were mentioning a few moments ago, because I think if we're talking about the state of high school athletics and kind of where the parents fit into this, I think that the statement that you made a moment ago, well, Jennifer, she's going to UConn. No, she's not. And I think that is so true, because it brings about the question of, again, what is the role of high school athletics? What are we doing here? Is this AAA for the NCAA? No, I don't think so. I think it circles back to a point you made a while ago, and that is this is the secondary classroom. You go to class for the first 6 hours of the day. You learn, the add, subtract, multiply, divide, how to write, how to do this, how to do that. And then you go to this after school activity in order to figure out how to be a better person, how to be a good teammate, how to be, use the athletic gift that you have, or in some cases, just for that social interaction that you've been craving to have. This is your way to connect with other people, is through a bat, a ball, a stick, or otherwise.
Yeah, in no way is this a launching pad for college athletics and then, pro. No way. And we've all seen the numbers. We all know. And deep down, all these parents know. I get it. They mean well. They invest time and now money into Jenny or Joey's athletic development. And man, there's a lot of shucksters out there too that are taking that money too. But that's a different topic. Listen, it's just not going to happen. And I think that line of distinction is becoming quite clear now, where MIAA sports are, yes, you're going to have the Neil O'Connors of the world who go on to the next level, but more often than not, those kids are going to what is a AAA, what is the breeding ground for college athletics, and that's the AAU world, the prep school world. We're not in that world any longer. I think you look at a kid, maybe Chris Doherty from Marlboro High a few years ago. He might be the last kid we ever see from I really think this, from a Central Mass public school who goes to a high-profile college, like just a public school, not talking St. John's or St. Bernard's or Holy Name, but just a Marlboro High School, and he goes right to high-level Big East basketball. That's just not going to happen any longer. So even more so now, just please, parents, let your kids enjoy this time with their friends. What it is you're developing healthy habits, as you mentioned, how to be a good teammate, how to overcome adversity, how to take criticism, how to respond when you're beaten, and how to come back. And these are the things that is what MIAA sports are now, especially in the public schools, especially in Central Mass and Western Mass. It's just not going to happen. If Jimmy or Jenny is that good, and I don't like this, I cannot stand the fact that these kids show up in ninth grade, they're phenoms, and then you never see them again. And 4 years later, you say, wait, that name sounds familiar. Oh, yeah, he went to Leominster High for 4 months, and then he went to so-and-so academy in the middle of the woods in New Hampshire, and now he's playing for Rutgers, right? So, but it's just not the reality. So I think parents are and Todd, kids understand it. They know that me playing at Leominster High, that's a really high level of football for Central Mass. It's great. It's a great experience. We're going to compete for a state championship, but this is as far as I'm going to go. This is it. And I think the parents just need to wrap their heads around that. It is not going to happen. If it's going to happen, somebody will find your kid. It doesn't matter how much money you pay the quote country, or they concentrate on their AAU seasons, and it's just not the same anymore. So for MIAA sports, which we love, which we care about, which we are immersed in, it is what it is. That is an extension of the classroom and just a really good experience, nothing more.
One of those items that I don't often get to talk about on a broadcast, but I think one of the things that was most striking to me when I went to Syracuse and for my 4 years there and got to know athletes that did reach that caliber from all across the country, especially in sports that were not as high profile, but even in some cases, a few high profile athletes that I got a chance to meet with and speak to away from, their game and my coverage piece of it, just to get to know them as people. The most striking thing, because of whether it's the parents, the grandparents, the coaches, the people who do truly, I agree with you, mean well, but maybe have their foot on the accelerator more than that student athlete truly wants. The thing that struck me most about meeting those Division I college athletes that blew me away was how much they resented their sport. Resented their sport, resented the time that they've spent to it, and that truly the only thing that they took away from it was the best vehicle for them to be able to financially afford to be in a decent position to get a great education. And they had that knowledge, whether they were freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. That's what they took away from their experience. They were able to turn their athletics and their ability into an education, and they had things kind of firmly understood as to where it fit in their lives. But truly, they hated their sport. They really, it just, for them, it was not a labor of love. It was not a labor of interest. It was a student athlete who just looked at it and was just like, oh, I've got to go to practice today. Or, oh, we've got a 3-game weekend, or whatever. They just didn't want anything to do with their sport anymore. And I can't imagine that all of a sudden just happened. Something about their experience put them in that scenario by the time they got to their college experience at the Division I level.
Yeah, and I bet if you dug deep down in all those stories, Todd, you would find out that the fun went away. When it becomes a business, when it becomes a means to get somewhere else, when two parties are using each other, that's not a healthy relationship. It is not. The school's using or the AAU program or the prep school is using the kid, and the kid's using them right back, saying, fine, if that's the way the game has to be played now, and it is. And as I mentioned before, it's awful. And that has changed. It was evident when I started doing this about 15 years ago. You had those cases, but now it's so prevalent that you hear about these kids, and there's a kid who lives in my town, the town of Clinton. Never heard of him. It's not a very big town, 20,000 people. He went to some prep school, and now he's pitching at a Division I school. Never heard of the kid. Never showed up to a little league, or nobody knew who he was. He just sort of happened to. His parents just bought a house here, and who knows? It's just so he was a gifted kid. You never saw him, and you wonder. The kids like that have the most fun. Think about all the things he missed out on with kids his age. None of the kids his age even knew who he was. But apparently he's lived there his whole life, and just kind of hanging out, being an athlete. And you wonder at what point is it no longer fun for these athletes? And I think for the most part, Todd, when we talk to the kids we talk to at the scholastic level here in Central Mass, if you ask them after a game, what was tell me about your feelings. Why was that? Why were you so excited? They'll always say, "Oh, that was so much fun," right? It's the most fun I've ever had with my friends, and I can't believe we won this championship. It's never, well, yeah, I bench pressed 225 pounds today, and my coach told me that I shaved 1/10 of a second off my 40 time. It's never that. It's I had a great time with my friends. That's it. And I think that's where we are, and that's the line of distinction, as I said before. There's athletes that are going to be competing for Central Met, well, no longer, but championships of some sort, right, shall we say? And then there are those who are using it as a means to an end, which is a college scholarship, and maybe that 0.001% beyond. And I think our athletes are very much in the category of this is fun, this is an extension of the classroom, this is going to end when I graduate high school. It's over. And I'm going to make the most of it as I possibly can and create some good memories and have a really good time with the kids I grew up with. That's it.
We will learn to master the term regional title, Tom, somewhere
Sure.
over.
I will not accept it, Todd.
Somewhere over the next couple of years, we'll master that term regional title somewhere along the way. We'll get to that statewide tournament as we continue in our conversation on the state of kind of high school athletics and where we are. And one of the other, I think, stories from this past year that really stands out to me was the South Shore Voc West Bridgewater controversy out in Eastern Mass that related to, obviously, because, again, the Federation football rules and the length of quarters and leagues trying to kind of, fly in the face of that because they felt like that was the safest thing for their student athletes and so forth. The part about that story, I think, that irked me the most was the fact that because the adults couldn't get it together, couldn't say, well, we're going to do the right thing by the student athletes to allow them to compete because they want to play the game. A game got totally taken away from 60 athletes. That part to me is the most distressing. I feel like set a precedent that we can't possibly allow it to stand. And the sooner that type of thing goes away from the lexicon. I mean, I can't even imagine that 20 years ago that there'd be a scenario where the game wouldn't get played. Yeah, the adults might fight about it. Yeah, the adults may disagree. Yeah, the adults might hate each other, but the game would go on. the fact that we're getting to the point now where the adults can't get it together and say, okay, we're going to do this. We're the home school. We get to make the final decision, show up and play. And that the visiting school goes, all right, well, when you come to our school, we'll make the decisions then on these things. And that's the kind of, tit for tat you have to accept. The fact that they didn't allow a game to happen just blows my mind.
Yeah, and there it gets back to there are some adults, Todd, who do not belong in these roles because they're just not capable of putting the student athletes first. I don't know what their motivation is when anything at all supersedes the well-being and the experience of these student athletes. You automatically need to go away because you've just lost all credibility. You no longer should be allowed to mentor and guide and educate these kids because your priorities are all screwed up. You have no idea what it is you're doing when kids have to intervene and try to be the voice of reason. That's a problem. And these adults, I don't know, it gets back to maybe there's not strong administrations on each side where they could stand up to these coaches and say, beat it, get out of here. Because you cannot tell me that in that situation and many others too, that the first and foremost and only thing that mattered was the best interest of the kids. Not true. And if that's not true, you have no, in my opinion, you surrender your right to be a coach and be called coach. No way. It's just there's somebody else who will do it. And your reasons are at that point selfish, or it's pride or a grudge, or as you said, maybe the coaches have this personal beef. Well, you know what? Now you're no longer an adult. You're immature, and you need to go away because you are stunting the development of these kids. You're setting an awful example. And as I said before, when the kids are the voice of reason and the voice of maturity, you failed and you need to go away.
And the kids will play under just about any series of rules that you lay out in front of them. All they want to know is under what rules will they be playing somewhere along the way. Tom, I appreciate the the kind of where we're going with this conversation. I've got so many things that I want to get to, so we'll definitely be getting together sometime in the very near future as well. But let's talk about kind of the distinct differences here as far as the self-interested party, right, versus the greater good. When people look at the MIAA, they have this vision of this legislative body. They make the same mistake with the NCAA, that it's some kind of a legislative body that's always going to select for the greater good. In reality, you have a self-interest versus the greater good. It's a confederation. It's a United Nations, if you will, approach to governing athletics. You have all of these member schools that come together. They have to organize themselves in some fashion democratically, where it's one school, one vote, one district, one vote, whatever the case may be. And you have to make and lay out these decisions for, the entirety of that sport or the entirety of athletics, broadly, when we're talking about this statewide tournament. When you think about that and you put it in that kind of context and you think about self-interest, I asked an athletic director about this. Steve Kendall from Air Shirley was on a previous edition here of Press Row. And I said to him, how do you deal with that process? And he said very candidly, I have 4 allegiances, but they are in this order. 1, I have an allegiance to my school. That's the school in the district is who I answer to every day. That's my employer. 2, I have an allegiance to my league because those are the people who I spend the time with, who we organize most closely with. Then I've got an allegiance to the sport because of my personal engagement in athletics. And then 4, I have an engagement at the state level. That's my last allegiance in this process. And I appreciated the candor, but I think to myself, but if you all have to get together with your individual allegiances and try to govern athletics, maybe we need something else. We need a commissioner. We need a non-standard somebody who's not employed by a school district or formally employed by a school district to make decisions about athletics.
I think you're right. I think Steve is great, and I'm not surprised that he was candid and gave his perspective. It's a perspective and he has that perspective from many different lenses, from a student athlete, from a reporter, from an administrator, from a coach. He's seen it all, and so I would absolutely concur with what he said as far as how he feels. His allegiance is sort of split up, and he's right on the money. And I think so. To your point, if this is in fact a democratic way of doing things, you need representation. And what we saw with the statewide tournament, it was pathetic in that there were schools who did not even bother to cast a vote. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And some of the excuses I heard, well, I'm so against it that I didn't want to, or I knew it was going to pass no matter what. It doesn't matter. You have to answer to parents or coaches at your school. What are you doing by not at least representing your community, make your voice heard, at least even if you don't, even if your position does not emerge uh, victorious, you still need to advocate for your kids, for your school, for your communities. And the fact that people didn't do that is a problem. And maybe it's because, Todd, maybe it's because that there is this, and it's perceived, but I also think we could probably find some data to prove this, that there's a Eastern Mass bias. And maybe that bias is just sheer numbers. But to me, and I don't want to speak for you, but others in our area who cover sports and even out in the western part of the states, our friends out in Springfield and beyond, I think there's a consensus among us that it does not matter because we just don't have the numbers to counter whatever Eastern Mass wants. And we've seen it with the statewide tournament. And so was that really a democracy? I'm not sure. But the point is, Steve's point, and I know Steve is someone who's really passionate about his role and takes it very seriously. You cannot be just sitting. You can't be sitting out. What exactly is your purpose? If I'm on the school committee or I'm a parent of a student athlete or I'm whoever I am, I'm going to my athletic director and my principal and saying, where did you come down on this statewide tournament? I'm not going to tell you what I think, but I want you to just give me the reasons. Just tell me why this is good for our kids. Why is this good for our school, for our community? What is the advantage here? What do we get from it? And I don't think that I still haven't found any real value to anybody in Central Mass with this system. What do we get out of it? To me, nothing. It is what it is. But it gets back to, is it a democracy? Do they need something else? Yes. But what is that? With resources being so thin and budgets being so thin and margins being razor thin, you can't pay an outside agency to run them. You pay your dues to the MIAA because it's what you know. It's the evil I guess. But I don't know what the solution is, but it clearly isn't working because it's an Eastern Mass organization. It is. And it's no fault to them either. They're advocating for their kids just the same way we should be, but it just comes down to they just overwhelm us with numbers and with influence too within the ranks. You have to believe that's true. As you said, most of these guys, or if not all of them, are retired school administrators with allegiances, with these sort of backroom deals. I always joke, I call them the Applebee's gang because that's what I envision. I envision a bunch of old-time coaches out there at Applebee's scribbling on a napkin, hey, let's do this. Let's make sure that St. John's Prep and Catholic Memorial play in the state championship in every single sport, every single season from now into eternity. Done? Done. Cool. Let's have some nachos, right? To me, that's what that is. And I just don't think there's fair geographic representation, and I don't know what the solution is. But until that happens, it's always going to be Eastern Mass baby, and whatever Eastern Mass wants, they get.
I agree with you, and I think that's why I thought for both Central and Western Mass, I thought that this statewide tournament idea was actually a chance, although Eastern Mass had you thinking that it was to their benefit, you actually had kind of a reverse ability here, right? If you're in Central and West, you've always been forced to travel to one another. And when they started these great shifts or readjusting what the sections looked like, and they moved Eastern Mass teams to Central and Central Mass teams to West, it kind of, again, put the burden back on Central because you had people invading from the East. And then if you weren't one who was getting invaded upon, you got sent to invade out West. And to me, where was Lee going? Lee was going to play in the Albany division. I mean, there's only so far you could keep shifting before you have a problem somewhere along the way, right? So to me, the kind of the turnaround on that point is, because I've heard that argument you said, what did Central get out of this? To me, what they got out of it is finally forcing somebody else to have to share that burden. The fact that Orleans may have to travel to Pittsfield, to me, might be the best thing that comes out of this scenario, because at least at the end of the day, everybody is now forced to travel through the state, regardless of sport and regardless of where you're located.
Right. I agree with that 100%. Maybe it's sort of, okay, you really want to do this? Let's check it out. And I've heard that argument before. Some of the other, when this broke out, you had some of the, the Twitter guys talking about, well, in Oklahoma, you might have to go 5 hours. Well, this isn't Oklahoma, so who cares? Who cares what you do in Oklahoma? This is Massachusetts. And to us, traveling 3 hours for a high school volleyball game is an inconvenience. It's not a great use of time or money. So you're right. Maybe there will be some sort of perspective that this is what we deal with all the time. Let's really reevaluate this. But I think Todd, the whole thing to me is that every single year, the best team wins. The best team wins the state championship every year. And to say otherwise, well, you're a loser. You're making excuses now. Well, if I'm the coach for, let's just use one of the Catholic conference. If I'm St. John's Prep and I say, well, I had to play one more game, so but BC High won the state championship. Well, you're a loser. That's an excuse. That's an excuse. You're not the best team, because if you were, you would not have lost that extra game. You would have beaten BC High or whoever. So you're making excuses. So that argument always ranks so hollow. The best team always wins, and let's face it, we can admit it. That best team usually, I think the data will tell us, usually that best team is an Eastern Mass team, and that's fine. There's all sorts of reasons in talk about making excuses, but there is. It's just different population. There's bigger numbers. We're never going to consistently compete at that level. You'll have the outliers. The Leominster High baseball team from a few years ago. You'll have these outliers that are able to compete, but it's not going to be consistently. So the bottom line is the best team wins a state championship every year. And if you're mad because, well, my team didn't win because Billy had to pitch on 3 days rest, well, you didn't win because you don't have the depth. That team's better than you because they have more pitching. That's the bottom line. The best team always wins. And if they say otherwise, it just flies in the face of anything that athletic sort of encompasses. Athletics is competitive, and may the best team win. And for you to have to rejigger the system so that you can have a quote equal opportunity and play an equal number of games, just go out and win. If you're that much better than Central Mass, then why does it matter? Win your tournament, then it should be a walkover when you finally get to the Western or Central Mass team. It should be you've already been coronated. You're the king. Just go to the DCU Center and kind of show up and have some laughs and beat the crap out of Doherty High School. Fine, you're the best team, so why does this matter? To me, it just doesn't matter. It gets back to just how important Central Mass championships are. If you've been to gyms and fields all across Worcester County. What do you see? District championship, league champion. That is huge to kids, to schools, to communities, and to say otherwise is insulting. And that was all dismissed. And again, it goes back to, where was our voice? If our voice as a region was truly heard and truly united, we still would have lost. But at least if we would have put up a better fight and made our points known, we just sort of look at, statewide media, we just sort of look like we're whining because we don't want to travel places. Well, that's not it. You're taking away tradition and for no reason. What is the reason? Is it money? We'll see. Because to me, you mentioned Orleans to Pittsfield, I'm not going. I don't care if my kid's a starting pitcher. I don't know. That'd be a tough call. 3 hours, maybe. We'll see. But to me, the whole thing is just dumb. It's just change for the sake of change and excuse making, good old boy network rearing its ugly head, and here we are.
And maybe perhaps injecting hopefully a little bit of energy with a new idea if nothing else comes out of this, because I think the alternative, which was going to be more of that east to central, central to west shift, that to me was the worst of the options possibly presented. So to me, if I was left with the vote was definitely for the statewide tournament, because the other option was horrible. I definitively wouldn't want that. I mean, we went down and covered right here on RFM a great game. St. John's and Franklin was a phenomenal, what was called Central Mass Championship game, would be a phenomenal playoff game no matter what you call it. But I would rather you call it a regional final than you call it the Central Mass Championship game, because that hasn't been the Central Mass Championship game going on 5 years.
Right. And that goes back to the 5 years ago, again, why are we doing this? And it was always because, well, the Eastern Mass teams are at a disadvantage because they have to play more games to get there. Oh, well, your parents shouldn't have bought a house in a more densely populated town then. Because that's the only reason we're even having this conversation. And to me, is again, it shouldn't matter if you're vastly superior as you claim to be on Twitter. And again, the records bear it out. The record books will state every championship, every sport, more often than not, boys, girls, spring, winter, fall. The Eastern Mass schools are going to reign supreme. That's fine. But so why all of a sudden do we have to, as you said, invade Central Mass and kind of make our way out? Central Mass is shifting west. So who benefits from that? Who? It's Eastern Mass schools, because to your point, whether it's Westford Academy, to me, it's always, you talk about Central Mass, and let's take girls basketball. Wachusett's always very good. And I was like, wow, they're going to win the Central Mass Championship. Oh, wait a minute. No, they're not, because there's going to be a Franklin or a Westford Academy that comes in, who's not really Central Mass, but they're going to go to WPI and they're going to beat Wachusett by 3 points. And it's going to happen, right? So to me, this whole shift thing was sort of laying the groundwork for what we're seeing now. Maybe there was an evil plan that we'll just introduce it this way and just really shake this up so bad that nobody's even going to care anymore. And they're just going to give up and say, fine, make it statewide. But to me, you're going to lose so much And I think we're going to start to see it once these tournaments take place. And I heard that, well, we're going to create some different rivalries. Well, why? Why wouldn't anybody want to see Leominster play Fitchburg in any sport? Why not? Why can't Leominster play Westboro 3 times in a year? Well, because the first game wasn't competitive. Well, they're both in the playoffs. They have to play. It's just again, you talk about adults being misguided and not really getting it. Just what is the reason other than Eastern Mass wanted that? You're not going to make more money. You're not. If they think that, they have another thing coming, because you're not going to get, your own Applebee's game. The Leominster travels really well. There's Leominster fans, longtime residents of the city, who go anywhere to watch the Blue Devils play football. But are they really going to travel out to Pittsfield or Taconic, wherever that might be, to watch? I don't know that they are. And so you're not going to get that, the quote gate they always want from that certain section of the bleachers that's filled in by folks who no longer have kids on the team, but they did 20 years ago. They love the program. And those people are not going to show up anymore. That's going to hurt your bottom line. So we'll see. We'll see who's right.
We certainly will at that, when we of course think about all of those people who you're talking about, and whether they travel or they won't or they will, or those kinds of things. I imagine to myself, coach, and I've put this to the different coaches and ADs that are here. I said, okay, let me give you some happenstances, and I would just throw out random towns. I ignored size, I ignored everything else, and I would just throw out an Eastern Mass school and a Central Mass school and a Western Mass school and a Central Mass school, and I would just throw these options out at them, and I'd say, okay, do you want any of those opponents, or do you want to play St. John's? Do you want to play Wachusett? Do you want to play Leominster? And of course, at the end of the day, they always come back with, yeah, I'd rather play those. And so it does say something about the system, and I certainly understand that. But being that we could not revert back, and this was kind of the argument I watched play out on social media, be it that we weren't going to get to go back and drive basically those Eastern Mass schools back over the bulkhead that is 495 back where they belong, and obviously go back to a traditional Central Mass alignment. If that wasn't going to happen and all you were going to do was force more teams out this way, I couldn't condone that process to continue. So that's why, hey, let's go with the statewide tournament. Let's see if it creates some more excitement. And hopefully we'll be talking about the excitement of regional finals somewhere along the way, much the same way we do, obviously with the NCAA tournament, as you talk about those regional championships, which are the same thing as a sectional championship, just the sections are much, much larger when obviously they organize things along the way. Tom, I got one more question for you before I let you go on this edition and bring you back somewhere real soon. If we got a chance to start over today, and you could blow it up, you blow up the MIAA, you blow up the leagues, because I think a lot of times, particularly in football, you see that whole structure cause a lot of problems somewhere along the way. You blow it all up, you get a chance to start from scratch. Give me the first couple of things. What are the first couple of things that you think could be done to replace this when you have hundreds of schools that have to compete under some form of a banner?
You go right back to enrollment, if it's up to me. Right back to enrollment. That was the most equitable way to do things. You could say, and there's always going to be appeals, there's always going to be the city schools that say, well, we may have this many kids in the building, but there's not really this many kids who are engaged in extracurricular activities. Fine, but you have to go back to enrollment at some point. You can no longer just let schools kind of talk their way up up, sure, go for it. But you can't let schools talk their way down any longer. You have to, that again gets back to the responsibility of the administration. Find a coach who can turn the program around, who could go into the building and get the best athletes to come out and play that sport, compete. It was like that for many, many years when you had just the 3 divisions in Central Mass. And I don't remember anybody complaining, but somewhere along the way, and I don't want to get all old man on the get off my lawn again, but somewhere along the way, we had the infiltration of the trophy generation where, should we really be playing this school? They have 200 more boys than we do. You have to have a cutoff somewhere. To me, that's the perfect place to start. Let's go enrollment. How many boys are in the school? How many girls are in the school? And no longer can we, you talk about the technical schools. Well, these schools now, and from being an educator, and I know Kate knows too, these are not the schools they were 15 years ago, where sort of the kids who just, didn't really want to really take part in a classical education went. These are now great educational schools. You're getting great student athletes, and emphasis on the student as well as the athlete. They're every bit as competitive as everybody else. So let's get back to enrollment. And then I think you have to really consider taking a look at the private schools and maybe moving them to their own, because that enrollment's out the window then. And I'm not one of these St. John's bashers. I've never been treated with anything less than kindness and respect. And every time I've covered an event or talked to the coaches, the class acts. But the fact is, that's a regional all-star team. It is every year. It's a regional all-star team from 10 or 12 towns around Worcester. You're taking, let's just say you're taking the two best kids from every public school, and maybe that once maybe that's a little bit off from sport to sport. But at any rate, they need to be in their own category. We'll see what happens with the St. Peter, Mary, and Holy Name merger. Maybe they can sort of catch St. John's, but maybe that's a statewide. That you're your own. St. John's, you go and play in Central Mass, and Holy Name and St. Peter's, if they grow and can compete at that level, then they go too. But to me, the simplest way to do it, just go to enrollment, let it play out for a couple of years, and get better. You can't just, well, we were 0-10 last year, so now we're going to be in Division 6 and play Quebec. Sorry, that's not how it should work. You need to figure out, find the point person for your program and take your lumps and improve. It was done all these years. You saw teams from, again, using my town, Clinton. There are years when that football team was 1-9, and 2 years later they're winning the Super Bowl. Now, what happened? They didn't move up or down. They just got a wave of kids, and it's going to be cyclical. And these schools have to be willing to accept that these things are cyclical, but you need the people in place who place an emphasis. If you're going to have athletic teams, you might as well put every bit of heart and resource you have into it. And if you don't, then you're just gonna be 2-18 in basketball. Sorry. And maybe 4 years from now, you get a new wave of kids and you're 18-2. Let's go back to enrollment, start from there. That to me is, sort of the new starting point, if you will. If we, as you said, if we could just start over, that's it. That's the baseline. Go back to enrollment, boys, girls, see what happens, maybe with consideration for some of the private schools to go off on their own and make sure that this is balanced. But other than that, let's just start there and let the chips fall where they may, and everybody do their best to put the best folks in place to make their teams competitive, period.
Fastest hour of sports talk. Tom Flanagan, thank you so much. Another hour here on Press Row flies by. We will definitely have you back with us in the coming weeks and months ahead. And, of course, the year to come as we get set for that new statewide tournament to kick in 2021, 2022, or 2022, 2023, somewhere along the way. Those numbers.
Can't wait.
Yeah, indeed. And then, of course, at that time, we can also talk about the merger you mentioned as well. I don't know that I'll ever get used to St. Paul being a part of, Central Mass Athletics, but that's what we got. All sorts of things, and it is a constantly changing athletic landscape. The Worcester Telegram and Gazette's Tom Flanagan here on Press Row. Tom, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to having you again soon.
Yeah, I had a great time. You guys stay healthy, and thanks for having me.
All right, Tom, thank you so much. And we thank you so very much for being a part of our family here on Press Row on Rivalry Family Media. For Tom Flanagan, I am Todd Robbins, saying thank you so very much for joining us. And until next time, so long, everybody.